Ready to go.
Yeah.
Will, we're back, bro. Week
Good
two.
to see you, Luke.
Good to see you too, man.
Yeah. I think Sunday was really good.
Yeah.
For those who haven't listened to the sermon, it's a good opportunity to maybe listen to that first, because we'll be talking about parts of it, I guess, here.
Definitely. We will. We're going to make a swear jar today
Oh, yeah.
for...
An invisible one.
Yeah. 100%.
100%. No more ums.
I didn't realize how much I say
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of annoying.
I think you forget things you do naturally when you're trying to think,
It's true.
until you either see yourself as someone points it out to you, and then you become a bit more hyper aware of it.
It's true. Today, we're going to jump into a interesting topic. I'm more interested now. The more I look into it, the more interesting it is. It's the falling.
Mm.
Yeah. So Sunday we talked a bit of an overview about the falling from Genesis chapter, 3 to
Yep,
11, basically.
yeah.
Although we didn't cover the last little
Tower
bit,
of Babel.
the
I think
Tower
we
of Babel.
Definitely have that today. It's a good one.
We should definitely cover that. But let's start.
Yep.
Let's talk about what is, and this is a confusing one, what is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as opposed to the tree of life, which
Yeah.
we did talk about last time and on Sunday. But what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
Yeah, I think the tree of life's quite self-naming, right? So it gives you life, the tree of life.
Yes.
But I think I wrote down a while ago, so eating from the tree of life is acknowledging that God's sovereign. And so you're in his steps, you're following his line, his order of things, his order of the perfect world, and you agree with that. Yep. Whereas eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is saying, I will take responsibility. I know what's best. I know what's good about the world. I know what's bad. I'll make those decisions, and kind of trying to make yourself sovereign over all things, rather than God being the total sovereignty of the world.
So it's kind of like wanting the knowledge so that you can have the power.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, we're trying to usurp God in his position and take it ourselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've already got it's like this classic 2IC syndrome, right? You've got so much power, like
what more do you want?
But I want that top job.
Yeah, I think we see that in our daily lives, right? I'd love the title, but not many people want the responsibility, and that's what I've taken the tree of good and evil is. I want the title of being the dominant one in creation.
Yeah,
but I don't particularly want the responsibility of it.
Yeah,
that comes with that power.
Yes, I want the power, but not the responsibility. So there's this concept of being blessed in the Genesis narrative, which is really amazing and powerful. It's the concept of being flourishing, personally, flourishing by receiving God's life, and then taking that responsibility, giving it to others.
Yeah.
Or helping the whole world also experience that same life. So that was our original our original call.
Like Eden was the blueprint, if you will, and then we'd take that blueprint and then spread it out. And I guess we were the conduit of how God was going to sort of impart that on the world.
Yeah.
So, but I think
different than the animals.
Plug in it, right? We're deciding, I'm not going to spread this power that God's given me. I'm just going to keep it for myself, and I'm going to be the top dog.
Yes. So different than animals. I think this is important for, like, Christian worldview, is that we are not the same as the animals.
Yeah.
And the difference is, yes, the animals are blessed by God, but we have an added responsibility along with our blessing, and that is to make sure that those animals and the world and other people that are to come, generations to come, that they get to live in that blessing because of the way that we are stewarding what God has given us. So kind of like you could think about things like pollution and things like, I don't know, just animal cruelty or I don't know, just violence, rape, all these things were us abdicating that responsibility to ensure that others are blessed and they get that blessing that God is trying to give it to them. So we have a unique responsibility in the middle of that.
I think even Lewis, like C.S. Lewis talks about it in Mere Christianity, what he says about, it's like the potentiality for good and evil. And so, you know, a cow doesn't have much potentiality for good or evil. It's just a cow. It's just going to eat, maybe it'll run
Does
into
cow
you. But,
things.
yeah. But then, you know, a child has a bit more leeway. It can do like some good things. It could do some really naughty things.
Oh, yes.
But then humans, like as fully grown adults, children are obviously still humans, although sometimes they don't act like
Small
it.
humans. Yeah. More like animals. That's true.
Welcome to kids' church. But yeah, so as a fully grown adult, we have the potentiality to do some amazingly good things, some helpful, self-sacrificing things for others.
Yeah.
But we also have the potentiality to do some really terrible things to one another. And I think like one way to say it is because we've given up that responsibility of spreading the blessing throughout the world is we live in a world we've created.
Right.
We wonder why there's so much bad in the world, but how often do we stop something that we know is wrong? Even the small things, say in our workplace, if someone's getting teased, it's easier just to ignore it or jump on the bandwagon so you don't get attacked than to stand up for that person and put yourself on the line and potentially, you know, not having fun. Or what about if you see someone stealing something in the shops? Right thing would be to do, oh, mate, that's the wrong thing. Or maybe even learn about them. Maybe they're starving, right? And then you could show them love and God's grace by buying them the food or whatever. But it's all too easy to avoid conflict and then step away from it.
Interesting.
And so that's how we live in the world we've created, because we don't stop the things that are bad that we should, and we don't do the things that are good that we should do. And that's part of Christ's saving grace, is he's inviting us to be part of that journey, to start spreading those little Edens all over the world until it's fully encompassed the planet, rather than the bad side fully encompassing us.
Yes. So we're either going to spread this God image. Dr. Van Shaw, who was here recording in our podcast recently, in our studio, he said we are image bearers and we are presence carriers, meaning everywhere we go, it's like God is there.
Yeah.
Because we are, like you said, conduits of, I love Tim Mackey says that we are deputized into, we're given authority to bring the blessing of God everywhere we go. We are presence carriers of God.
And that puts more pressure on you as a Christian, right? If you're a self-professing Christian out to the world, then that puts a lot more pressure on you, because again, you're representatives of, you know, of Jesus Christ, our Savior.
Yeah.
And so, is that what a Christian does?
It really pushes back against that concept of I'm a private Christian.
Yeah, 100%. Swear jar.
There's no such thing as a private, this is my private faith. Yeah. Well, if it's that private and it's not affected your life and it's not affecting the world around you, I wonder how much of it you are letting change you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it maybe something that you're wearing as
a fashion accessory?
A fashion accessory. Yeah, I was going to say,
I'll go to church because I know people like me there.
Yeah.
They'll be nice to me. Or I've got some friends there, rather than I'm going because I want to grow my faith with the
That's
Lord.
True. So we come to the concept of sin. And I was really excited to talk about sin, actually, because I grew up with this understanding of sin as in simply only a moral framework. So that means moral things good, immoral things sin. And then you can just keep on adding to the list of things that are not moral. Or, you know, kind of like, I feel like what religion does a good job of like giving us a list of things that are not moral. Yeah. And saying, we are the ones that tell you, these are the bad things, okay?
Here's the checklist. Do this, don't do this.
Yes. And it can easily become that. And I remember preaching this. Sin is all the bad things you've ever done, thought, and said. And I thought, as I step back and I study the Bible more, I think it's a very narrow, a very small way of looking at what the concept of sin is. And I love the way that Tom Wright talks about it. he talks about sin is about giving up my vocation,
Yeah, that's a good one.
giving up what God created me to be and do in the world. And he calls it giving over to the powers or giving it to evil.
Yeah.
So instead of us going into the world and representing God and carrying his presence to the world, it's giving it over to evil and that evil spreading to the world. And we're going to come to, obviously, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but can we just talk a little bit about the concept and the nature of what does it mean to sin, or what is sin?
Yeah, I think that we hit it on Sunday, right? And say like the base meaning would be like falling short.
Yep.
And so falling short of a standard. And so whose standard is it we're falling short of? It's God's perfect standard in the first place, right? It's not just going to be a list of don'ts.
Yeah.
It's also things that we ought to do. Again, you can be a Christian, not do all the bad things, but fail to do all the right things God's asked you to do.
Yes.
God's asking you to do something, he's asking you for a reason,
Yep.
and to participate in kingdom building. So it could be, I don't feel like telling that person I'm a Christian because I'm just too scared.
Yep.
Although one of my old pastors had a great way of saying, he said, don't say no for someone else.
Yes.
Yeah, and I
love
thought that was
line.
perfect, like let them say no for themselves. But Augustine, he had a good way of saying, he said, sin is the disordering of God's hierarchy of goods. It's desiring lesser things rather than better things. Sin is not a desire for naturally evil things, but an abandonment of better things.
Yeah.
And when we look at it, it's you can kind of imagine why that's quite logical, because what God made in the world is good. And when he first ordered it, he ordered it to be good. But we took that ordering and took it from order and changed it into chaos. And so we took what shouldn't be used in one circumstance and then used it in a circumstance that we thought would be right. And so, we've taken those good things and used them for bad purposes. I use the example with people, especially in Alpha, of driving a car. Like, if I made you a car, gave it to you, and you just drove it in reverse everywhere, you're going to destroy the car because you're not using it the way it's supposed to be used.
Yes.
And the same way God's created us, and we don't use our bodies and our purpose the way we're supposed to use it. We use it in reverse all the time.
And even as you're talking, I still feel like there's this pushback against that. Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Don't tell me the way that I need to live is still somewhere there in my psyche. And that's actually, I think the way they made the character of the Joker was this chaos agent.
Yeah.
That he was disassociated from anything that was orderly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And lived in total chaos. And what would that look like? I don't think we need to really wonder what that looks like. I think we see that in many places of the world and in our own lives. We see what it looks like when we reject God's order. And I think it keeps coming back to this thing of like, do you actually believe that God's order is good?
Yeah. Whose sovereignty do you agree with?
Do you trust that? Yeah. Or do you think you can do a better job?
Some people would suggest, and have written that, the original sin itself is the introduction of self to the person, all about self. And then as soon as you have selves all over the world, we talked about that divine dance last podcast, right? How God, Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit all go around each other trying to do what's best for each other rather than themselves. And that's when we start to say, oh, God, I'll follow you when it's good, when it seems right, but when I want to do something different, I'm going to do it my way. And that's asking God to orbit us rather than us orbiting him. And again, that's from Tim Keller. And so it's highlighting ourselves as the center of the universe. And there can only ever be one center. And so God's at the center.
Sorry, it's God.
I bet you're his deputy, right?
I thought it was me.
Yeah, well, maybe.
At the center of the world.
But then if I also think I'm the center and you think you're the center, we're going to clash because there can only be one.
Yes.
Classic Highlander movie there. Probably I feel like a few people listening to this might know what Highlander is, right?
There's only room in this town for one of us. Classic
so,
standoff.
Yeah, when you start to have those selves conflicting, that's when we see chaos start to come out of it.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about in our church, pride and humility. And you'll even see this with Jesus. Jesus comes representing as a humble God,
Yeah.
as our example. And pride says, I will be number one. And that's the kind of picture and the language we get around what's later called the Satan.
Yeah.
Is he says, I will ascend, I will basically worship me. And he even says that to Jesus when he's tempting Jesus. He says, bow down and worship me, and I will give you whatever you want. If I'm number one, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And that's the same lie we're telling ourselves and telling other people around us. If you just let me be number one, everything will be okay. And we do that in subtle ways or grand ways, but it's deception.
Yeah.
It's not real. It's not in alignment with reality. The reality is when we allow God through humility to be God and join in his process, we actually find incredible fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, that's the way, and that makes sense, right? If God built us that way, if he built us to worship and be around him, then of course that's where we're going to be at our sort of our best, our most profitable in life, and live our best lives is when we follow what God wants us to do, because we're following the manual of how to use that car.
So live your best life is not like
Do what you want.
you doing you.
Yeah. Well, because often, right, and I think I say this during Alpha, often God gives us what we need,
Yeah.
but he doesn't give us what we want, because there's a difference.
Yeah.
We think what we want is what we need, but it's not.
I really want that new car.
Yeah. And so, like, what are you going to do with it when you get it? Is that going to satisfy? Is that going to fill the God-shaped hole in your heart? No. You just desire something else.
I mean, it left a major gap for what we call in the West consumerism.
Yeah.
The economy of stuff, and leads to, I mean, we're like the most burnout, mentally unhealthy generation ever. I think a lot of it does come through that consumerism, which again is filling that gap of, I need this thing to be happy, but you don't.
No.
You need God to be God in your life and to submit to that and let him bless you.
We can see that at the base level, right? How many amazing experiences, if we look back and truly look back honestly in our lives, how many amazing experiences have come from a thing that you've purchased? Half the time you don't remember. Like, there's that desire of like, oh, I can't wait till I've saved up for something. I've been researching it. I've watched YouTube videos on this thing that I'm going to get. It's going to be awesome. It's going to make me so happy. You buy it, and in 5 minutes, like, oh, it's not as good as I thought it was going to be. It's like a disappointment, right? Like the lead up's much better.
Yes.
Those aren't the memories that we have. The memories we have are with like family, friends, those relational things, because we're built for relationship.
Yeah.
And so when we have a relationship with the Lord, that's where we're going to have a abundant life.
Yeah. I think, is it James or someone, I forget who this is, talks about the being carried away by sin. When opportunity and my evil desire meet, then there's this birth of sin and chaos, and ultimately leading towards the path of death in our lives. And that's interesting. One of the best marriage advice I got as a younger person was, be careful what you give to your wife, because women are naturally multipliers. So if you give her a lot of love, she's going to multiply that and fill your home with it, and you'll be very blessed. If you give her criticism or whatever, she's going to multiply that too. So be careful what you give your wife, because she'll multiply.
No fury, like a woman scorned dry.
Yeah. So you could say that's true about as part of, one side of humanity. But I think it's true in a human sense as well. God has given us something to go and represent in the world. Yet we are very good at multiplying, because that is the blessing that God has given us, is to go, be fruitful, multiply. But it's what you're multiplying is pretty important. Like we're saying, we talk about the Great Commission, and I think some people view that as, maybe colonialism or some of these things that have happened in the world, we've taken not the gospel and spread it to the whole world, but we've taken something else and spread it to the whole world. It's in our human nature to do that. I think it's careful. It's nice to reflect on what are we actually multiplying.
I've actually written something down for that, like progress. And so, that's the world we live in. We're always like trying to progress, do better, expand, get more and more and more, and do whatever it is. And Christopher Ryan in Civilized Today said, when you're going in the wrong direction, progress is the last thing you need.
It's so true.
So true, right?
Oh, man.
I mean, like even in the small things, like you could see how people get caught out for doing something wrong. And
Yes.
they lie about it.
Yeah.
And then that lie snowballs. And they're just like, right, I'm fixed in this now. I'm not going to change direction from this lie. It gets worse and worse and worse. And so who knows what happens
It's true.
after that.
We see this in politics.
Yeah.
I literally do not agree with what you're saying, but because you're on my team, I'm gonna push it forwards anyway. It's like you're not even being rational anymore. What?
Just because you're on the opposite, I hate you. Even though it's a good idea, I'm not going to say it's a good idea. I'd rather see the world burn than see you do well.
in that sense, politics has become the new religion, the new world religion, especially during COVID. We see this in the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Right? They are like super progressing in the opposite direction of what God's called them to do, which is go and fill the earth.
And it reflects with us today, right? Because you look at, they had a new technology,
Yes.
like the brick. And so that enabled them to build taller things. And so Babel's really like looking in Babylon. And they've got like these ziggurats. And so
What is that?
It's just like I guess
Like
it's like
a
an
kind of a
old
structure?
pyramid,
Okay.
like a sort of a pyramid sort of
before
idea.
the pyramid?
Yeah. And so the idea is that at the top of this ziggurat, that's where the sort of the gods would live. And
They would
maybe
come down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, we'll make this tower and we'll be amongst the gods and we'll make a name for ourselves. And then God's like, I don't think so.
Not so much.
I gave you an image, I gave you a name, and you rejected it. You can't come into my realm. And I think I can't remember the way it's said, but I think when the Hebrew writer wrote about that story, I think the original was like Balal or something like that. But then he's modeled it for the Hebrew word that's like Babel, so like to confuse. And so what God came down and confused them.
So the actual city name is called it like confused?
Well, that's what the Hebrew writer called.
Right, so it's kind of a play on words there.
So he sort of like jumbled it up and like, oh, you fools, you thought you were technologically advanced. You've tried to go far and then, but God's come and confused you. But that leads us to today, right? Homodeus, so Yuval Harari. In seeking bliss and immortality, humans are in fact trying to upgrade themselves into gods. Not because immortality is the divine quality, but to overcome our biology, we need to become gods to do creation. In the 21st century, the third big human project will be to acquire divine powers of creation and destruction, upgrading Homo sapiens to Homo Deus. And like gods. And so we see that, right? Look at the weapons that we have.
I was going to say I saw Oppenheimer the other day, good? The movie. Incredible movie. Incredibly well made. I'm a filmmaker, so I can appreciate it. The story is incredible. Having lived in Japan 15 years, it probably hit home more than I expected it would. When they were choosing the cities, which cities to bomb, and it seemed like they were very casual. Now, I'm not sure if that's a real representation of what happened or not, but it seems so casual. Like, which one do you want?
Well, the second one was like they'd already proved that they were going to give up, and the second one was just a test to see what would happen, right?
I don't know. I think there's like if you go to Japan, they would tell a different history than America. I don't want to cause too much controversy around that. It's conflicting information there, what's taught in those two countries. Interesting, but I just thought Oppenheimer was very concerned that they would actually blow up the whole world, that it would not end.
But they went through it anyway, because the Nazis will do it, so we better get there before them.
So there was this saying like, yeah, we've got to pursue this great evil. And there was a story about the man who dropped the bomb onto, I think it's particularly Nagasaki, that was quite a large Catholic population at that time.
Okay.
A lot of Catholics there. And he himself was Catholic who dropped the bomb. Later on, I believe the story, if I'm not mistaken, is he's like repented, and he was, I guess, really disgusted in himself that he did not object.
Yeah.
That he knew that there were people there. He said, my own brothers and sisters in the faith were right below me, and I did not think to object, and no one else did either.
Yeah.
And just to say, like, when we get a thirst for power, and we have it, we all have it, how far that can go.
And how easily we can put our view to say, oh, these aren't people anymore.
Right.
These aren't, they're just going to kill us, so we might as well just wipe them out.
They're not made in the image of God.
Look what the Nazis did in Nazi Germany to the Jews, right? They changed the populist idea from, oh, these are people, to these are people taking from you. This is why you're poor. This is why we have no jobs. This is why we lost the First World War. They gave out propaganda videos putting them as vermin. And so to kill another human being is not like an easy task. I think in the First World War, the guys were just shooting over each other's heads a lot. And so during training, they were trying to train them to shoot at the people, because you're just not going to go anywhere. You're just going to be shooting ammo over someone's head. Like, nothing's going to happen. And when I was in the forces, when you do your shooting, you're still shooting at like the charging German, like shooting at a person sort of thing.
Wow.
And so it's to try to make that soldier effective, you've got to like say, oh, well, that's not a person.
him.
Yeah. And so that's what they did to the whole German populace. And that's how they wiped out so many human beings.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, once you do get that power, it's like, oh, well, I'm better than you. So what? It makes it okay for me to inflict my power on you, inflict myself on you, and push you out of the way.
Wow.
And that can start at a small thing. It can start, Jesus talks the Sermon on the Mount about is trying to change heart issues. If you hate your brother in your heart, it's as bad as murder. And that's because I could hate you in my heart, not do anything to start with, but then I could start ignoring you or talking badly behind your back or barging past you. And then that small little physical bump, oh, that was all right. Like, he's not worth it. And then that could come to hitting someone, or then more and more can plan to actually killing someone, and it not feeling that bad because you've progressed from such a small heart issue, which isn't that small at all, to a major world-inflicting issue of actually causing death on someone.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. Love Jesus. And this is probably like some of the tougher parts of the story that we're in right now. It's literally the falling. We're still feeling the effects of that today.
And we're still part of that today.
Yes.
We still push that out in the world.
Yeah.
We get to live, we're still blessed enough that we still live under God's grace.
Yeah.
Where that happens to those who have accepted him and those who haven't. But when that's over.
Yeah. And you could say it this way, today it's still, have you accepted God as God?
Yeah.
As he's been represented to us through Jesus.
Yeah.
His perfect representation to us. Have you accepted Jesus? It's not just have you prayed a prayer up the back of a room, a sinner's prayer.
I thought that was it. Done.
No, it's have you actually accepted your role and his role and actively joined your heart to that and let him come in and fill you once again with that tree of life. To change you, to renew you. The Bible calls it like almost like rebirth. It's like a whole new situation that you find yourself in when you allow God to be God and allow yourself to be fully human, which is a wonderful place in the world to be.
And that's the great idea of baptism, right? You leave that behind. I am a new person in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Like Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me.
Yep.
It's like one of my favorite verses because it does represent it all, right? I'm not that person I used to be, that terrible person.
Yeah.
I'm not complete yet, but it's Christ who lives within me. It's Christ who does the work within me and changing me, and I get to partner with him.
Yeah.
We take back that authority from creation to start spreading Eden across the globe and start to make those small changes where we can.
Yeah, it's great.
If you don't do it, who will?
Exactly. Adam Dodds, our friend, he talked about it like a down payment. The down payment is real. It is a real amount of money. It is not insignificant, but it's not complete yet. We are sort of in this moment right now where Jesus was a down payment. He's giving over his life was very real and a very real change in the world. That Tom Wright calls it the inauguration of the kingdom.
Yeah.
It is not complete. We are part of that.
Yeah.
That now taking that kingdom and spreading it to the whole world.
And that's why our work matters. The things we do matter. The calling that God's given us on our lives matters. I think we spoke about, I don't know if it was in the podcast or just outside of it, we talked about people, my ultimate goal is to work in ministry. Well, how are you going to introduce people to Jesus if you're just talking in church? These people are mostly already saved.
Yeah.
How are you going to introduce the new people? Then you've got a finite number. It's going out into your workplace and showing Jesus' love in the things that you do, in working hard because you're working for the Lord, not working for yourself.
I love that. Okay, so we're skipping way ahead, but coming back to the flood. The flood is probably the story that a lot of people get hung up on. I think unnecessarily, actually. And I talked about on Sunday how it was a Genesis 1 and 2 creation. Also, it went from chaos to creation to absolute decreation or degradation or,
So you've gone from disorder to order, and then we're going from God's ordered world back to a disordered world.
Back to disordered through violence.
Yeah.
Through absolute violence and chaos, back into disorder and back into the deep waters once again. So it's a really graphic picture of life without God, with God, and then without God, but violently without God.
Yeah. It shows, it's not going to get better.
No.
You're going to, humans alone can't handle it.
We don't naturally fall into, our inclinations don't lead us towards loving, caring, loving each other. And even today, I feel like there's a lot of this, thinking that we can progress past God. And I'm thinking the only reason you even think that about, there's, in Australia, we're very conscious of mental health and workplace, and, there's a lot of labor laws in Australia, that type of thing. The only reason we're concerned with that is because we have a foundation of Christian worldview, which tells us that you are made in the image of God and you are valuable. I wouldn't, thousands of years, we weren't thinking like that. We were just thinking, how can I kill you, get your stuff?
Yeah, I think people think that comes from the Western civilization. Well, it doesn't. Because if you look at the first missionaries that came to the UK, that in the Isles they weren't Christians. They were, they were pagans. So like my last name, Gwilt, means wild man. It comes from the Druids, right?
Yeah.
So they would have,
I like
they
that.
would have not been following Jesus.
Wild man.
Yeah, they would have been, Celts, Druids, those sorts of things. And so Mother Earth and all that ideology. And so, by ourselves, we do not love each other. People like to say that, without religion, the world would be a better place. Well, go ask that to the people that were living under Stalin. Communism made sure there was no religion around because the highest order was the state. And so millions and millions of people died there. Does that mean that were we all loving each other there? I don't think so.
No.
When there's nothing beyond this world, when self is the most important thing, when you've got to get as much pleasure and little pain in this life as you possibly can because there's nothing else, of course you're going to start inflicting self on others. I need to have the best life I can. And if you've got something I want and I have the strength to take it from you, well, I'm well within my right to take it if that's the worldview you look at.
It's interesting. We look at Asia and a lot of the parts of the world that don't have a real strong God heritage that's not a simplification, but we move towards a real honor and shame culture,
Yep.
which means, and I've experienced this in Japan, I need to build credibility. I need to look good in front of the group. So it's really about presenting my image. And we call it tatemae in Japanese. It means there's a presented image and then there's actual
Okay.
real
Like
myself.
two-faced sort
It's
of
very
thing.
much two-faced. Not in a negative, that's very negative in
yeah.
English, but it's like a presented self and a real self. And often there's a big gap between that.
Yeah.
That's why there's also a lot of depression.
Yeah. It'd be quite tiring,
And
right?
abuse.
Keeping up the veil.
Very tiring. And that's why there's a lot of language,
Yeah.
layers of language, which keep barriers between my presented self and my real self. But it's interesting, you take God out of the picture, you move more towards this very, very image culture, where I need to get stuff to look good in front of others. And you can see that's very at the core of humanity without God. But now, what's interesting is now we're actually seeing the introduction of that in the West.
Yep.
We're now, I think the West is becoming an honor shame culture. Look at social media, look at, how many followers I've got on Instagram. It's really, there is becoming more and more consciousness of image and curating image to be accepted by the group. And the highest values, I need to be seen as having a high status in the group. There's whole podcasts about this now, where young guys are making podcasts about guys' status, all this stuff. It's just a total misunderstanding of what it means to be a human created in the image of God. And so I think it's pretty powerful. I'll just end with this thought is humility is the antidote to a lot of this stuff.
Yep.
But humility was not a value when Jesus was around. In fact, humility was not seen as a good thing. Humility was seen as a bad thing because in that kind of culture, if you're humble, you're going to get beat up. Your stuff's going to get taken. Your kids are going to be slaves. You don't want to be humble. You want to be strong and fight. And Jesus comes in, preaches a radically different message about humility.
Yeah.
It wasn't popular.
No.
Now it's popular in Christian circles. Mental assent to being popular, not necessarily lived out popular. But even today, humility is not really a world value.
Well, there's
Still.
that humble brag, right?
Humble brag. It's not real humility. Real humility is not very cool or sexy.
It's because, again, if you're really humble, then you're hiding self.
Yeah.
And you're elevating someone else's self, or ultimately you're elevating God. And when you've given away the image, you as an image bearer of God, or you as an image bearer of God, I don't therefore see you as an image bearer of God. I just see you as a person, and therefore that person could be lesser than me. But if I see you as an image bearer of God, well, then there's not much I can do about that because God's given you your value.
Yeah.
And what can I say about that? I'm not better than God. Although some of us sometimes like to think we are.
Yeah.
We make decisions that we are. I think, a lot of people have a problem with the Christian faith because of the problem of evil in the world.
Sure.
And I think we've covered quite a bit of that idea that it's actually us that brings that into this place.
I heard Joe Rogan ask a Christian philosopher recently on his podcast. It was a really good podcast, but he was like, so why does God make these evil things happen if you believe in that? Which is a funny question because if you don't believe in God, I mean, you have no even claim on what good and evil is.
Yes, you're stealing from God, right?
I mean, you're stealing from God to blame God. It's more of a thought exercise, but what's the answer? What's your answer to that? What do you think?
So I think Lewis puts it best in Mere Christianity. He said, some people think they can imagine a creature which was free but had no possibility of going wrong. I cannot. Free will, though it makes evil possible, is the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having.
Yes.
If God wanted to, I think we covered this last time, if God wanted us just to be those Christian robots, I'm pretty sure he could make it happen. You wouldn't be able to choose to love him. You just love him and that's it. That's done. But that's not having a relationship. That's just having robots. And so he wants to have a family that chooses to be a part of family.
Yeah.
But then from there we go to, this goes into a bit of hell, but it's from The Great Divorce, again from Lewis. He says there are two kinds of people in the end. Those who say, God, thy will be done, and to those whom God in the end says, thy will be done. And so giving you over to yourself.
Yes.
All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and consistently desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek, find. Those who knock, door is opened. And that's, to me, I think that's a great way of putting it. If we go back to the start of our conversation, we've built this world we live in through our abdication of responsibility that we were given. We gave up, instead of ruling over creation, creation ruled over us, the snake in the garden. Instead of ruling over sin, we let sin rule over us, and we spread that throughout the world by ourselves being more important than other selves.
Yeah, wow.
And so when yourself becomes the most important thing and you just keep filling that void, people are going to annoy you. And you don't want to be around them because anything that person does conflicts with myself, and they're not praising me and telling me how wonderful I am. So you push people as far away as possible. And ultimately in The Great Divorce, that's what they're talking about. Hell is the people who've been there the longest, live the furthest away outside of town because they can't stand being near anyone else. Anything everyone does is all about them.
Wow.
But really it's just a tiny little place because you're a tiny little man with a tiny little self.
Yes.
And that's what we say, right?
In the truest sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas that tiniest thing couldn't inflict any danger or anything on heaven or the glory land with the Lord. Because it's nothing. It's nothing compared to being a full life with people, with relationship, with the Lord as our Savior and our center.
Amazing. Well, we're going to come to, in the next part 3, we're going to talk about the family of God.
Yeah.
And this concept of being blessed, this blessed family, which is funny because they're like a bit of a mad lot,
Yeah.
which I can relate to. And then God's graciousness through that whole process of choosing a family to bless others through. And then in part 4, I do want to get to some of the most difficult parts of the Bible where we're talking about what seems like a very angry God. That, at least that's what we're being told.
Yeah.
But as we dig into it, we're going to actually look at the scriptures and see that God's grace is so huge and God is so slow in sparing with his anger. And even when he's angry, we're going to see that he does good.
Yeah.
So I think that one's going to be really good and helpful. Maybe one to replay a couple times for people to get in your
I think
heart.
there's going to be a lot in there.
So I'm excited about the next couple of podcasts. Going to be good.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Tying together that the God in the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament.
Yes.
And that story's always been a story of redemption to
Yes.
save us from ourselves.
Yes. He just never quits.
Nah. Unlike me.
Yeah. He's not a quitter. Not a quitter like us. So we get to flood, rainbow, picture of God's promise. Every time you see the rainbow, remember, Christians, don't get intimidated by a rainbow.
Yeah.
Remember, God's promise is he will never give up on the world. He will never let it go into absolute chaos. And he invites us to be part of that plan of bringing his beautiful order to the whole world.
I think it's good.
It's going to be good. Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.